Hello, everyone, and welcome to the One Marketing Thing podcast. Today's topic is taking the stage, mastering the art of landing speaking gigs at marketing conferences and events. Hello again. I'm your host, Antoinette Blake, and you're watching the One Marketing Thing podcast. Now, we started this podcast for digital marketers to provide them with expert advice from veterans who have decades of experience. And today, we have one of those experts, Adam Fronista. And Adam is going to be talking about taking the stage, mastering the art of landing speaking gigs at marketing conferences and events. Adam, welcome to the One Marketing Thing podcast.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
And before we delve into, landing those speaking gigs, because it can be scary out there, tell us a little bit more about you and that of your journey thus far.
Yeah. So I've been in the digital marketing space well over a decade. I got my start in around 2009, originally with a background in software development, and a couple, actually not even very long out of school, landed a job as a project manager for a software development agency. That eventually opened up a door to explore digital marketing. I found that there were verticals, social media platforms that were just kind of coming on board around that time. I think Twitter was relatively new, and I took an interest to that landscape. And if you've ever worked at a startup, and you raise your hand and offer to do something, usually people say go for it. So I was at a startup at the time. They had really no marketing department, and I said, hey, I'm interested in dabbling in this marketing thing since we're not doing it as a company. And the founder of the company said, sure, have fun, just report back to me what you're doing. And the rest is history, as they say. So outside of that, today we run a well-established agency in the West Coast called Enleaf. Focus on website design, search engine optimization, and pay-per-click marketing. So happy to head that corporation, and we got a full team that are always busy in the weeds doing a lot of this digital marketing goodness. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. And, digging in the weeds, and every time you think you've got it mastered, then another weed pops up. That's so great. That is so
yeah.
great. I love that backstory. Now, but before we start, I wish I'd have met you years ago when I was talking about landing speaking gigs, taking the stage, mastering the art of landing speaking gigs at marketing conferences and events. To me, when people land a speaking gig, it's like they've arrived. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, it's definitely not an overnight process.
No.
In fact, I would say this year and a little bit of last, I've done more speaking events than probably the rest of my career combined. I think it all really starts with making a decision that that's what you want to do, and having, I guess, a good understanding of why that can be helpful and important to your business is also key, right? There's a saying, something to the extent of some people would rather die than, get up in front of a crowd and talk. And that's the case for a lot of people. So, I think number one, you have to identify if you either have or can develop that type of ability to speak, right? But what helped me, kind of get over my fears and get on stages and podcasts and other people's audiences, really that's the key to it, is realizing that doing so opens up a lot of doors, right? So, this podcast is a good example, right? There's, I'm sure, people that are going to see this, they're going to become familiar with, who I am and our brand. And who knows what will come out of that, but that's a good example. And speaking events, much like podcasts and webinars, are very similar. Once you really understand that this can be a very great asset for your business, for your agency, it then can give you the motivation. But I guess starting back into my journey, how a lot of this started, really it started on the other end, and that was going to events, going to conferences, getting to know who the people were, right? And much like you're doing here, you're outreaching to experts in this space. Now you've instantly put yourself in a position where you have a closer connection with people in different verticals of authority. And while I've never run a podcast myself, I've done something similar in years past, which opened up doors. So we used to do, and we're probably going to revive this here this year. We used to do what are called roundup posts. Have you heard of these?
Yes, sir, I have.
Okay, so you're familiar with the concept. Just in case nobody or somebody listening isn't, I'll
That's
kind of
old school.
explain
Bring it
it.
back. Bring it up now.
Yeah. So basically, a roundup post is a blog post where you have a particular question or series of questions, and you outreach to authorities in a particular industry or space to say, hey, we want to get an expert opinion on such and such question, right? And the reality is, everybody likes to talk about themselves, right? They like to feel special. They like to feel like, hey, somebody reached out to me and wants to hear my opinion. It's much more likely you're going to get a yes in an ask like that as compared to just, hey, can you do me a favor? Or, can you, those asks that take a little bit more involvement. And so it's a good way to get your foot in the door. So a couple of years ago, I created, along with my team, a number of roundup posts where we did just that. We reached out to other people in our industry, authorities in the space, and then slowly but surely, I would create these posts, and then I would go to the very conferences of a lot of the speakers that I had interviewed, and I'd introduce myself, and then people would be like, "Oh, you're that roundup guy," or "Hey, yeah, I was part of your roundup post." And now all of a sudden, I go from being nobody to being recognizable. And long story short, that series of circumstances has led to relationships for me personally, for other industry leaders, which has opened the door to webinars, to international speaking events. But none of this happened overnight. This is a very long period from the point when I started those roundup posts to now. I would say probably 4 or 5 years ago. But now, because I've taken the time, I've involved myself in the communities and surrounded myself around the people of authority that I wanted to be associated with. Now I'm to the point where I'm more of a peer than just somebody in attendance. So that's kind of, the Reader's Digest of how some of this, can work for somebody who's willing to put in a little bit of the sweat equity.
Adam, that's great. And, I'm thinking now that we're coming out of the pandemic and now we're in person, because for a long time, speakers didn't have that opportunity to get out and in front of others and do that networking, as you stated, to build their selves. And so roundups, and, I haven't done a roundup in, years, but it was always fun because, like you said, people love to share their knowledge. That's just amazing.
Well, and that's why we were thinking about reviving it, because it's the same thing. There, the idea for that wasn't original, right? Somebody had approached me about doing a roundup post, and I was like, man, this is a great tool, because I always say yes, right? They're promoting me, and as a result, I want to promote them because, hey, they're talking about me, so go check out this post, right? So I ran with that idea and did it for our own agency. But to your point, it is funny because I have noticed that it seems like it's fallen out of favor. And I don't know if that's just because everyone's, onto video or podcast. But I think we're in the process of a redesign for our own website. But one of my goals after that is to start doing a couple new roundup posts, just because I think people are still sleeping on that. And maybe fallen out of favor, but I still have a feeling that that still is very viable. And also too, like, I know probably not everybody in, listening to this is maybe as entrenched in the search engine optimization world as I am. But one of the things that Google is really starting to emphasize, especially with AI content and all the changes, is originality in content. And there's nothing more original than a roundup post, because it's literally quotations from people. It's not stuff that's regurgitated online. So I think not only is it a good tool, because it seems like not as many people are doing it as they used to, but number two, it gets you in front of, and in front of those other people in your industry. And number three, it seems by its very nature of the structure of that piece of content to fit right within where Google seems to be going these days.
And I'm glad, Adam, that you mentioned that, because if you want SEO, those backlinks are gold, because
They're
everyone's going to be
important. Yes,
sharing,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah. Well, and that's part of why we would create those roundups too, is because people, our process, when we were doing this more actively, is, create the outline, have a Google form where we, do outreach to all the targets that we want to be included. And then following the post, then we say, hey, the post is live. We would be happy if you shared this on social media or with your email list, or link back to it from your website. And inevitably people, they're more likely to do that because it benefits them, as well as you. So all around, it's a really good tactic. I don't really understand why it seems like people have slowed down on that tactic, but it's just one of many, and obviously what you're doing with podcasting, I think is very similar for those that maybe are more media minded. That as well can be just as good as a tool for this sort of thing, right? Getting in front of people that otherwise might not give you as much of their time otherwise.
And it's also a great thing for those that may prefer to be behind the scenes. Not everyone wants to be on camera.
Right.
Not everyone wants to be on radio or a podcast. So the written word is powerful. And you said something, and I want to go back, because you said Reader's Digest. And I wonder how many people remember Reader's Digest. They were the best of, Reader's Digest were the best books ever, magazines ever.
A nice summary of, the key points, right? Yeah.
I love that. I love that. But no, we're seeing ebbs and flows. Podcasting is not new, but it didn't become popular until now. So same thing with roundups. So with people that are thinking about, even I'm looking at you and I'm seeing the books behind you, we can create ebooks with those roundups. Like, would you like to be a contributor? Which I've found that to be just as great as speaking, right? Because if you do go to these conferences and you have an ebook with, your name or your contribution, it's better than a business card.
Yeah, one of my favorite authors, I don't know if you're familiar with Tim Ferriss, 4 Hour Work Week.
Yes.
So that's exactly what he does. If you take a look at the last, I think 2 or 3 books that he did, they're literally his podcasts. He goes and interviews experts. And then I'm assuming he's not doing it. He's probably sourcing this, just knowing his materials. But then he takes those interviews and turns them into chapters of his book, right? Tools for Titans is one. It's a brilliant model, because now he's able to repurpose different verticals of content, right? And I've seen people do the same thing, right? They'll take maybe an interview like this, or a one-off interview or a webinar, and they'll turn it into a blog post, and then they'll turn that into multiple social media posts. And so outside of the whole, like, getting in front of other people of authority, the idea of repurposing content and taking something old and maybe putting your own spin on it, just from a pure marketing perspective, can be a really great practice. And it's something that we preach all the time.
Yeah, that's great, Adam. And so if someone is thinking, what, I have all this information inside of me and I know I can share it, what should they now just like reach out to those that are in that field? Obviously the roundups are great. Like if they're a blogger,
Right.
But if they're not, how do they get, you know, to the the ones that are saying, "Hey, we want you as a speaker"? What should they have built
Yeah,
up?
I think it
Because
depends
it's
on
not
like,
overnight, like you said. It's going to take years before
yeah.
anyone's even going to consider you. So should they start like a YouTube channel where they're speaking so that people can say, "Well, send me your highlight reel," or so that they get to know you? Like, to me, that's like if I can see you in action. Like the one
Mhm.
good thing about LinkedIn, they give you those few seconds of a video so that
Right.
someone can see and recognize you. And obviously with this podcast, I can see Adam. I like him. He talks well and he would be a perfect speaker. So what other suggestions you have for people that want to get out there and share their messages and their content?
Yeah, I think one, understanding like what medium you are comfortable with, right? I didn't always, I wasn't always in like very comfortable in front of a camera, and still today, like, I have no problem doing stuff like this. I'm fairly good, in front of an audience, but I'll tell you what, I'm recording a webinar right now, basically a training series. And I don't know what it is about that, but I find it particularly challenging, right? So, and some people are much better in written form. That's where maybe, a roundup post would make more sense. So figure out what medium you're comfortable with and that you enjoy. But chances are, whether it's written, video, audio, there's a vertical and a version of the quote unquote roundup methodology that you can use. At the end of the day, and I don't want to brush over this. The idea is that you insert yourself next to those authorities, right? So in the case of a roundup post, you also present yourself or maybe somebody in your company that you want to highlight as one of the people among many that are answering those expert questions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did for myself personally. Like I would go and find the top people in my industry. I
Mm-hmm.
would get their questions. I would put a profile image, a link back to their site. But I, of course, had my own answer in response to the roundup as well. So now anybody that's coming to that says, "Oh, wow, Adam is on the same, virtual stage as this guy
Mm-hmm.
or that gal." So it's all about building, you know, um, basically brand trust, right? Building
Right.
your brand. I'll give you some other examples and ways to build your brand. So, for instance, I've spent a lot of time this year interviewing for placement on podcasts such as this.
Mm-hmm.
And for those that provide it, a lot of times I'll take the larger podcast and I'll work with our video editing team and turn it into little snippets.
Mm-hmm.
And I might roll that out a month from now or 6 months from now, and it's not the full podcast, but it's a little snippet, right? And it makes my personal brand front of mind, so people are like, "Oh wow, Adam just spoke on this podcast," or
Mm-hmm.
"Oh wow, I didn't know he spoke for this." And that inevitably, you do that enough, it starts opening up doors. It becomes like a snowball effect. If people start to interpret you as an authority, then they're more likely to work with you. And that's the other thing too. So going back to what I started some of the conversation on, the why get on stage, why bother, especially if it's something that people don't always enjoy. Well, again, it's because you start building brand loyalty and brand trust. And if I had to pick between two people to work with, one who was kind of the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, you never really see who they are, and somebody who's front and center, running workshops, doing courses, running webinars, who are you going to go with, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
going to go with the person that is out there, teaching and preaching what they do. So that's, for us, that's a big part of it, right? It becomes a big sales tool for us to, for me personally, to build, my personal brand and inject that into our whole entity, our whole corporation.
That's wonderful. And before I let you go, let me ask you a quick question on imposter syndrome, because that seems like
Ah,
people, that stops a lot of people.
it does. Yes. I'm glad you brought that up. So, yeah. And let me define that just in case anyone doesn't understand what that is or hasn't heard that. So, the idea of imposter syndrome is this idea I think we've all struggled with, like, oh, I feel like an imposter. Like, I can't believe I'm on this stage, or I'm on this podcast, or I'm writing this article, or I'm being mentioned on the local news. If people only knew that I was just, a Joe Schmo, right? The the reality is everybody suffers from imposter syndrome. And so what I've done to get over that is anytime I feel that fear coming up, I realize like everybody feels this, right? From your politicians to your musicians, like everybody feels that at some point. I don't think it ever fully goes away, but the more that you can rise up against that, the more confident you can be, going out there, or stepping out on a limb and allowing yourself to present yourself and what you have to offer to the world, in a more meaningful and authoritative way.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, I didn't want to let you go without asking about that, because that's I think one of most speakers, or that's their biggest fear factor, the imposter
Yep.
syndrome. So thank you, Adam. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you taking out your time today to
Of
be
course.
a guest here on the One Marketing Thing podcast. And if you guys have any questions after this interview for Adam, or anything about the show, send it to an email to editor@passionatemarketers.com. And Adam, thank you so very much, for talking about taking the stage, mastering the art of landing speaking gigs at marketing conference and events. And I'm pretty sure we could go on, but we might have to bring you back and talk a bit even further, because I do have a couple
Sounds
more
good.
questions for
I'm
you.
willing to come back anytime. So
Thank you so very much.
my pleasure.
And we also want to thank our sponsor, Propel. Now, Propel is a unique review automation and management platform, and they'll help you. They have a tool that can turn your website visitors into customers. So thank you, Propel, for sponsoring today's episode of the One Marketing Thing podcast.